You know that moment when you witness something that simply shouldn't happen? James White, at 85 years old, carried on his shoulders decades of military service and a kind of dignity only those who've faced real battles can possess. It was an ordinary afternoon when he left a medical appointment, walking slowly the way people do when they've lived long enough to realize there's no need to rush. His steps were measured, cautious, but still firm. The posture of someone who learned to walk through terrain far more dangerous than a quiet city sidewalk. But fate had other plans for that seemingly uneventful day. All it took was a slight brush against a motorcycle handlebar to turn a peaceful afternoon into something far bigger. The biker, without even processing the situation or realizing he was facing an elderly man, reacted with a level of violence that would shock any decent human being. His heavy hand came down on James's face with enough force to knock him to the ground. And there, on the cold asphalt, lay a man who had once faced real enemies on actual battlefields. It's astonishing how some people only manage to be brave in front of those who can't fight back, isn't it? Life has a cruel way of revealing who we really are, and sometimes it makes you wonder, what does strength even mean? The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that carries the weight of an injustice seen by all but confronted by none. James stood up on his own, calmly gathering his scattered belongings with the same care he probably used to organize his gear back in the day. No tears, no cries of pain, no plea for help, just the silent dignity of someone who's seen worse and knows that some battles are not fought with words. But sometimes, my friend, the universe has its own strange way of balancing the scales. And what looked like just another episode of disrespect was about to become something entirely different. Have you ever stopped to think about what happens to society when we witness an injustice and simply do nothing? Right there in front of that busy bar, at least a dozen people saw the whole thing. The shove, the fall, an elderly man picking himself up from the ground. It was as if an invisible film separated James from the rest of the world. A barrier made of indifference and complacency, stronger than any concrete wall. People continued their conversations. Some even turned their heads away, as if ignoring what happened could make it disappear. It's fascinating and terrifying how easily we convince ourselves that it's not our problem, when in reality, our humanity is being tested right before our eyes. The bystander effect isn't just an academic concept. It's a brutal truth that plays out every day in our streets, schools, and workplaces. The more witnesses there are to an incident, the less likely it is that anyone will step in, as if the responsibility is so diluted among the crowd that it vanishes altogether. James gathered his broken glasses and scattered groceries as a crowd of so-called decent citizens pretended nothing had happened. Think about it. How many times have you witnessed something wrong and hoped someone else would take action? It's more common than we'd like to admit, and it says a lot about what we've become as a society. But what was most disturbing wasn't just the lack of help. It was how quickly everyone went back to their normal activities, as if a war veteran being humiliated was just another forgettable event in the noise of modern urban life. James, with his unshakable dignity, didn't ask for help. Maybe because he knew none would come, or maybe because years of military experience taught him to rely on no one but himself. But while the silent crowd moved on with their lives, something very different had begun to unfold behind the scenes. Because sometimes, my friend, true help comes from where you least expect it. There's a world of difference between calling for help out of desperation and making a call with the calm confidence of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. James, or Walter as some once knew him, pulled out his simple flip phone, the kind with physical buttons that many today see as outdated. His fingers, slightly trembling with age, dialed with precision a number he probably memorized decades ago. Eagle 6. 2 words on the screen that meant far more than anyone around could have imagined. In military language, code names like that aren't random. They represent bonds forged in fire, ties that transcend time and distance. The conversation was brief, almost whispered, using the minimal words of someone trained to know that every second counts. James didn't raise his voice, didn't dramatize, didn't beg. He simply reported the situation like a mission log. Compromised situation. Requesting assistance, he may have said. Something that simple, that sharp. And on the other end of the line, a voice he hadn't heard in years must have felt something tighten in their chest, instantly recognizing the quiet urgency behind the words. That's how it is between veterans. Words become luxuries, but understanding runs deeper than blood. After ending the call, James walked calmly to a nearby bench and simply waited. No panic, no desperation. Just the patience of someone who spent sleepless nights in trenches, waiting for orders or the sunrise, whichever came first. People walked past him, not giving him a second glance, just another old man resting after a long day. But if they could see beyond the surface, they'd realize this wasn't the waiting of someone lost or forgotten. It was the silence before the storm, and that ordinary afternoon was about to change forever. Have you ever felt the air around you shift in an instant? It was exactly 30 minutes. James checked his simple wristwatch, a military habit he never abandoned. First came the unmistakable sound that made everyone on the street freeze in place. The rhythmic, powerful chop of a Black Hawk helicopter slicing through the calm sky of a sleepy town. It was a sound that didn't belong there, an intrusion of military force that instantly transformed an ordinary afternoon into something out of a movie. People began pointing to the sky, confused, some even snapping photos, unaware that they were about to witness something far beyond the grasp of their daily lives. The helicopter wasn't alone. Almost simultaneously, a black SUV, the kind you see in action films, pulled up with surgical precision right in front of the bar. The doors opened in perfect sync, and men in tactical gear emerged with the quiet efficiency of a mission planned years in advance. These weren't regular police officers. They weren't private security guards. It was obvious from their posture, their gear, and the way they moved. These were elite professionals. The contrast was jarring. Minutes ago, James had been just another invisible old man in a sea of indifference. Now, all eyes were on him, and on the men who had clearly come because of him. But it was when the last man stepped out of the vehicle that the puzzle began to click into place for the more observant spectators. Tall, military-bearing, impossible to miss, a presence molded by decades of command, and in his eyes, a restrained fury that would make any sane person take a step back. "Commander Briggs," someone in the crowd murmured, recognizing the insignia. James rose from the bench with an expression that mixed pride, relief, and something close to a quiet smile. "Because sometimes, my friend, family isn't just about shared blood. It's about those who stood beside you in the trenches of life. And when you call, they come. No matter how many years have passed, no matter the distance. You know what's truly powerful? When real strength doesn't need to shout to command respect. Commander Briggs and his team didn't arrive with threats. They didn't wave weapons. They simply stood there, and their presence alone said everything that needed to be said. The biker, who minutes earlier had felt bold enough to strike a defenseless elderly man, now seemed to shrink 3 sizes in the presence of those who radiated a natural, unshakable authority. It's fascinating how true power doesn't need to prove itself through violence. It manifests in posture, in a steady gaze, in the calm of someone who knows exactly what they're capable of. The difference between a bully and a warrior had never been clearer. There were no screams, no physical confrontation, no Hollywood-style showdown, just a silent lesson in what real respect looks like. The special operators took up positions with quiet precision, forming an invisible but palpable perimeter around James, protecting not just a man, but a principle of human dignity. The biker, who had probably never faced men trained for situations far more dangerous than bar fights, now felt firsthand what it meant to be in the presence of true professionals. His arrogance vanished like morning mist under the sun. Suddenly, he wasn't the aggressor anymore. He was just a coward, exposed before an audience that now truly saw what had happened. By the time local police arrived, likely called by a startled onlooker, it was all calm, peaceful even. The biker had lost all his bravado and surrendered without resistance, as if he finally grasped the weight of his actions. It wasn't fists or weapons that humbled him. It was the undeniable truth that James was not alone, that there were people willing to cross entire states to ensure he was treated with the dignity he deserved. And as the handcuffs clicked shut around the biker's wrists, something far deeper was unfolding in that community, something no one there would soon forget. Have you ever seen how a single stone tossed into a lake can create ripples that reach the farthest shore? That's exactly what happened in that sleepy town, once frozen in its own routines. The arrival of those military operators was like a wake-up call, an alarm ringing through the collective conscience of a community that had forgotten what it meant to stand up for one another. Suddenly, men and women who had long gone unnoticed began to emerge, veterans who kept their medals tucked away in dusty drawers, hiding their service stories like shameful secrets. It was as if James's courage to ask for help gave everyone permission to show who they really were beneath the masks of everyday life. What's most remarkable is how fast everything changed. Within hours, the same spot where James had once been ignored and humiliated became a spontaneous gathering place. Neighbors who barely acknowledged each other were now shaking James's hand, listening to his stories, showing up simply to say, "You're not alone." Local businesses began offering discounts for veterans. Children stopped to talk to the town hero. Even those who had remained neutral at first began to reflect deeply on their own role as citizens. It's astonishing how a single act of injustice can paradoxically awaken the best in people when they finally decide that silence is no longer an option. But maybe the most beautiful part wasn't what happened in the town. It was what began happening beyond it. Veterans from other regions started showing up, some driving hours just to shake James's hand. Entire families made it a point to visit the site, not out of morbid curiosity, but as a kind of pilgrimage of respect. The transformation wasn't just in how people saw James. It was in how they began to see each other, as if this one incident had torn the blindfold from a community's eyes. And when a local story begins to ripple far beyond its origin, touching hearts and waking people up from their emotional numbness, that's when you know it struck something real. We live in an age where anything can go viral in a matter of hours, but rarely do stories that actually matter reach the right people. James's story spread across social media like wildfire. Cell phone videos from bystanders, emotional testimonies from witnesses of the helicopter landing, and heartfelt accounts from veterans sharing their own experiences of disrespect and abandonment. Within days, national television programs were calling the small town. Journalists wanted to interview everyone involved, and suddenly that forgotten corner of the country was in the spotlight. But here's what's most fascinating. James remained exactly the same, humble, reserved, almost embarrassed by all the attention, because what truly mattered wasn't happening in TV studios or front-page headlines. It was unfolding in casual conversations at diners, among neighbors, in late-night talks with friends from a community that had rediscovered its core values. Entire families began having conversations about respecting the elderly, conversations they hadn't had in years. Parents explained to their kids why we defend those who can't defend themselves. Young people who had once seen veterans as distant relics of the past were now seeking them out, listening to their stories, trying to understand their country's history through their eyes. The real transformation wasn't in the likes or shares. It was in the hearts and minds of people who decided they didn't want to live in an indifferent society anymore. When the town council decided to honor James with a commemorative plaque, it wasn't just symbolic. It was an official acknowledgement that the community had changed forever. The corner where it all happened was renamed Briggs Field. a tribute both to the commander who came to James's aid and to James himself, who many later discovered had served under that very code name in his military years. The plaque doesn't tell the whole story. Plaques never do, but it stands as a daily reminder to everyone who walks by. Every person has their own battle, their own story, their own dignity that deserves respect. And while the occasional tourist stops to read the bronze words, an even deeper story continues quietly behind the scenes. There's something profoundly transformative about the moment someone looks in the mirror and doesn't like what they see. Mike, that was the biker's name, spent weeks in jail confronting not just the legal consequences of his actions, but something even harder, the reality of who he had become. It's not easy to accept that you were capable of striking a defenseless elderly man, that you've become exactly the kind of person you despised as a kid. The letter he wrote to James wasn't part of any legal strategy. It wasn't prompted by a lawyer hoping to reduce a sentence. It was a genuine need, the kind that burns from within, a man finally seeing the full weight of his actions, handwritten, with a shaky hand, soaked in a shame too big for the paper to hold. The meeting between the two men happened far from the cameras, in a simple room where only raw, unfiltered truth could exist. Mike didn't try to justify himself. He didn't blame work stress or personal problems. He simply apologized, owning the fact that he had become someone even he couldn't recognize. James, seasoned by the experience of real war, didn't show anger. He didn't seek vengeance. Instead, he offered understanding. Because sometimes people have to fall very far before they find the strength to rise again. It's remarkable how true strength often isn't about how hard you can hit, but how deeply you can forgive, how clearly you can see the humanity in someone who once hurt you. Mike's decision to start therapy and volunteer at the local Veterans Center didn't come from a judge's order. It came from him. He started small, cleaning, helping organize events, offering rides to older vets. And as he heard the stories of those men and women who had served their country, Mike's anger and frustration started to seem small, insignificant. And while he swept hallways and sorted donations, a quiet transformation was taking place. Not just in him, but in the very trajectory of a story that had once seemed over, but was clearly beginning a brand new chapter. James's Thursdays were never the same again, but not in the way you might think. He still did what he always did: doctor visits, light shopping, peaceful walks through the town. But now, something had changed in the air around him. People didn't just see him anymore. They greeted him with genuine respect. They paused to chat. They asked about his health with real care. It wasn't performative attention for a local celebrity. It was the earned recognition of a man who had always been worthy of it. James accepted all this change with the same quiet dignity as always, never letting it feed his ego, never becoming arrogant or self-important. What's most striking about the entire story is how James never changed who he was. Despite everything, he remained the same humble man, polite, helpful, reserved when it came to his military past. When curious young people approached him to ask about his experiences, he always answered briefly, then gently steered the conversation away from himself. It was as if he understood that true strength doesn't seek a stage. It doesn't need public applause to be real. His example taught more about character than any motivational speech ever could, because he lived his values instead of just talking about them. During a modest ceremony at the Veterans Center, Commander Briggs, his own son, delivered a speech that moved everyone present. He spoke of growing up watching a man who never had to raise his voice to be respected, who never needed to boast to prove his worth, who faced life's challenges with the same quiet courage he once showed on distant battlefields. Real strength, he said, his voice breaking, doesn't shout, it doesn't show off. It doesn't chase the spotlight. It simply exists, persists, and inspires through example. And as James listened to the words of the son who had followed his path, everyone in that room knew they hadn't just witnessed a story of justice. They had witnessed a lesson on what it truly means to be strong in a world that often confuses noise with power. So now, let me ask you something. After everything you just heard, when was the last time you stood up for someone who couldn't defend themselves? When was the last time you looked beyond the surface and saw the full story of a person before judging them? James's story isn't just about a veteran who was disrespected, it's about all of us and the choices we make every single day. Do you want to be part of the crowd that stood in silence while injustice unfolded? Or do you want to be like Commander Briggs, someone who dropped everything to stand beside someone in need? Let me be blunt with you. The world doesn't need more people talking about change. It needs people who are willing to become it. Mike, the biker, could have left this story as just another coward who attacked the elderly, but he chose a different path. He chose to look in the mirror, hate what he saw, and do something about it. And you? Are you ready to do the same? To examine your own behavior, your own biases, your own tendency to look away when someone needs help? Because stories like this don't end with applause, they end with action.